So this was my favorite place to come when I was a kid and we'd come down to the beach. So I thought I would show you guys some of my favorite stories. So here we have the first of two famous little girls that are buried in the cemetery. This is Vienna Dill, and she died, I think, of yellow fever. And she was such a pretty little girl, and her mother was so devoted to her that they had her buried in a glass top casket so her mother could see her face. Unfortunately, some people tried to dig her up a few years later, and when they saw the glass top casket, she still looked just as pretty as ever, but they cracked it and she decomposed kind of right in front of them. So, little sweet, little spooky, kind of all in one story there. This one gets harder and harder to read every year, but if you've ever driven down the main drag of Morehead City, which is called Arundel Street, you may recognize that second name. This is Bridges Arundel, who was one of the ministers at the church for this graveyard. Lived in Morehead City, but was actually buried here when he passed. So I said there were two famous little girls in this cemetery, and this is the second one. As you can see, she's a little more famous, a little more popular. So the story is that she grew up here in Beaufort, but her parents were from England, and she always wanted to see where her parents were from. So she grew up wanting to go to England, and finally one year her dad said, okay, fine, we will take you back. So her dad took her back to England, but her mother made him promise she will bring her little girl home safely. Unfortunately, the little girl got sick on the ship back, and her father, not wanting to break his promise to her mother, bought a barrel of rum from the captain, had her interred in the rum, and so to preserve her body, and brought her back. So she is buried in the bottle of rum. There's no name on the grave. I'm sure probably someone in the historic site has it, but her gravestone that you can see behind that 24 sign just says little girl in the bottle of rum. So this was another one that was always kind of a favorite. This is Captain Otway Burns. If you've ever been to Burnsville in the mountains of North Carolina, that's named for him. The cannon is off of his ship. Depending on which side of the ocean you were on at the time, you would have either called him a privateer or a pirate. So this one, you may notice a flag that you don't normally see in American cemeteries, certainly not Revolutionary War era cemeteries, but this is actually a British naval officer, and he insisted that he be buried with his boots on, facing England in salute. His name, again, is kind of lost to us. I'm sure somebody has it, but that's who he is. So as you can see from the shells that have been left here, this is another kind of famous grave locally here anyway. This is a husband and wife. The wife's name was Sarah, and her first husband died in a shipwreck, or so they thought. Her husband went off to sea, died in a shipwreck. Word comes back. Years and years go past. She's a woman, she's alone. She gets married again to someone else. And then her husband returns miraculously, which is great news, except for her second husband. So the two gentlemen got together and came to an agreement that she would spend the rest of her physical life with her second husband, but she would spend eternity beside her first husband. And that is how they are buried here. So this small marker is kind of unassuming, especially compared to some of the fancier ones that we've seen. But it is notable because it is the oldest date that we can still read anyway. It's 1756. Like I mentioned, there are probably older graves that have their markers have either rotted away or been destroyed or lost over time, but this is the oldest one that we still have a confirmed date for. So right at the start is a gravestone that is unusual for this particular cemetery, but will look very familiar if you've been to any of the cemeteries up north. It's early 1800s, I think it says 1808, and it's a Heaven's Gate style headstone with the swooping gates of heaven at the top. Don't see a lot of those here, especially not in this cemetery, but you will see them a lot up north. So here we're towards the back of the cemetery, and you kind of notice it's a little emptier here, especially compared to more the front of the cemetery, which is odd. Land is, deer. So what's going on? Why are there nobody back there? Well, the answer is we think there are people back here. Unfortunately, there have been 2 wars fought through Beaufort, and during one or both of them, records were lost. So, sometime in the early 90s, I think it was, they did some research and some testing and discovered that there are burials there, but we don't know who they are. Now, Nancy here has a really sad story, but it does have a happy ending. She fell in love with a young man, but her father did not approve. So the young man went off to find his fortune to, I think, Arizona, and wrote to her regularly. However, her father was friends with the postmaster in Beaufort, so the postmaster intercepted all of those letters and never delivered them. So Nancy never knew. So fast forward many, many years, Nancy is dying, and who comes back to Beaufort but the young man that she had fallen in love with. They were able to reunite. At the end, unfortunately, she was very sick and she passed away not long after his return. So, in addition to these stories, which I always really liked, there are also some really pretty markers and memorials to people. So you can see all the different styles from the headstones here at the top with the draperies and the various urns. And then as we turn around over here, there's another little trio. If you notice the second one, the top looks like it's been broken off. And that is because this young man was in his 20s when he died, and his parents had his marker broken to indicate that his life was unfinished at the time of his death.